There is a generation that grew up with more freedom than any before it and less emotional supervision than anyone realized. They walked home from school alone, let themselves into quiet houses, and figured out their feelings without anyone naming them. They were told this made them strong, self-sufficient, mature for their age. But here's the paradox. The independence that defined Generation X was not born from confidence. It was born from necessity. They learned not to need too much, not to feel too loudly, not to expect constant reassurance. And while that created resilient adults who can handle almost anything, it also created a generation quietly unsure what it feels like to be fully supported. The front door closes behind you with a hollow click. Backpack on the floor, shoes kicked off. The house is quiet, not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet. The kind where the loudest sound is the refrigerator humming and the TV filling the space so it doesn't feel like no one's home. For millions of Gen X kids, this wasn't an occasional experience. It was routine. Both parents working, or one parent gone, or adults stretched thin by financial stress and their own unresolved worries. No one waiting at the kitchen table to ask how school felt. No one noticing the subtle shift in mood after a bad day. Just hours of unstructured time and the unspoken expectation, you've got this. And they did. They made snacks, did homework, learned which emotions would pass if ignored long enough, learned how to self-soothe with music, television, imagination, learn how to be alone without calling it loneliness. This is where Gen X emotional independence begins not as a personality trait, but as an early adaptation to absence. When a child repeatedly handles their inner world alone, they develop an internal voice that sounds steady, practical, and self-contained. They don't panic easily. They don't expect immediate comfort. They assume feelings are something you manage privately. As adults, this becomes a kind of quiet competence. They don't make scenes. They don't crumble under minor stress. They don't demand constant emotional attention. But there's a hidden layer beneath that calm surface. They also don't always know how to receive care without feeling awkward, guilty, or like they're asking for too much. Because their nervous system learned early, support is not guaranteed, so don't depend on it. Every generation grows up with a certain emotional atmosphere, and Gen X came of age in one filled with uncertainty. The Cold War loomed in the background of childhood. News reports talked about threats that felt abstract but heavy. Political trust wavered. Divorce rates climbed. Cultural norms shifted quickly, leaving many families improvising emotionally. Adults were figuring things out as they went. To a child, that creates a subtle psychological message. The world is unstable, and the people in charge don't always have clear answers. So Gen X kids developed a quiet watchfulness. They learned to read the room, to notice tension, to stay out of the way when adults were overwhelmed. They didn't always get emotional explanations. They got emotional atmospheres, and they adapted to those instead. This is where their trademark skepticism begins. It's not born from arrogance. It's born from early exposure to inconsistency. Promises felt fragile. Stability felt temporary. So they learned not to lean too heavily on anything outside themselves. At the same time, culture became their emotional teacher. Music lyrics said what no one else was saying. Movies explored alienation, identity, and quiet rebellion. Subcultures gave belonging, where family systems sometimes felt emotionally distant. Gen X didn't just consume art, they lived inside it. They built emotional vocabulary from songs, late-night radio, and films that understood what it felt like to grow up in the space between structure and chaos. This created adults who feel deeply but often process those feelings internally. symbolically, or through humor rather than direct emotional display. If there is one emotional phrase that defines Gen X, it's this: I'm fine. Not because they are always fine, but because they learned early that emotions didn't always change outcomes. If a parent was stressed, your sadness didn't make them less stressed. If adults were busy, your confusion didn't make them less busy. So feelings became something to regulate privately. They developed emotional compression, the ability to feel something intensely, then fold it small enough to function. They became experts at going to school, going to work, showing up socially, while carrying entire emotional weather systems inside. This is why Gen X adults can seem calm in situations that overwhelm others. They have decades of practice staying steady while processing quietly. But this strength has a cost. When you get used to minimizing your needs, you can start believing your needs are, in fact, minimal. You hesitate to ask for reassurance. You downplay stress. You compare your pain to others and decide it doesn't count enough to mention. And because they don't always ask for support, people assume they don't need it. Over time, this can create a subtle, emotional isolation. Not dramatic loneliness, but a quiet sense of always being the one who handles things, the one who listens, fixes, supports, adapts. The strong one, and the strong one rarely gets asked, "Are you tired of holding everything together?" Gen X humor is dry, observant, often laced with irony. This isn't emotional coldness, it's protection. When you grow up watching institutions wobble, leaders disappoint, and systems change faster than anyone can emotionally process, you develop a natural resistance to hype. You don't get swept away easily. You don't trust grand promises without evidence. Cynicism, for Gen X, is a way of managing expectations so hope doesn't hurt as much. If you assume things might fall apart, you're less shocked when they do. If you keep a little emotional distance, disappointment feels survivable. Underneath that skepticism is actually a deep sensitivity. They notice hypocrisy. They feel injustice sharply. They care, but they've learned to express that care through wit, music, loyalty, and quiet endurance rather than emotional grandstanding. They may roll their eyes at the world, but when things get hard, they show up, they stay, they hold steady. Because long before adulthood demanded resilience, childhood already trained them for it. When a child learns early that emotional support is inconsistent, they don't usually become louder. They become quieter. They stop asking for help unless it's absolutely necessary. They solve small problems alone. They soothe big feelings in private. And, over time, this becomes a point of pride. I can handle things. For Gen X, this self-sufficiency followed them into adulthood like a second skin. They are the ones who don't want to bother anyone. The ones who say, "Don't worry about me," and mean it, even when part of them wishes someone would worry a little anyway. They are often deeply empathetic toward other struggles, but strangely dismissive of their own. If they're overwhelmed, they tell themselves it's temporary. If they're hurting, they remind themselves others have it worse. If they need support, they wait until they absolutely can't manage alone. This is not emotional numbness. It's emotional self-containment, learned so early it feels natural. But over years, this habit can create a quiet imbalance. They give more support than they receive. They become the reliable friend, the dependable partner, the steady coworker. People trust them because they rarely fall apart publicly. Yet, beneath that reliability can be a silent question they barely let themselves think. If I stopped being strong for a moment, would anyone notice? That question isn't dramatic. It's soft, almost embarrassed. But it's there a reminder that the child who once handled everything alone grew into an adult who still assumes that's the safest way to be. When Gen X fell in love, they often did so without a clear emotional blueprint. Many grew up in homes where affection was shown through responsibility rather than emotional expression. Love looked like working hard, providing, fixing things, keeping life functional, not necessarily talking openly about feelings. So Gen X adults often love the same way. They show care through reliability. They handle logistics. They remember practical details. They express devotion by staying, by doing, by showing up again and again even when things are hard. But saying, "I'm scared," or "I need reassurance," can feel unfamiliar, even vulnerable, in a way that's hard to explain. So they translate emotions into action. Instead of saying, "I need you," they say, "Text me when you get there." Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," they say, "It's fine, I've got it." This can create misunderstandings with partners who express love more verbally or emotionally. Gen X may feel deeply connected, while the other person feels unsure because the feelings aren't spoken as often. Yet their loyalty runs deep. When they commit, they tend to stay. They work through difficulties quietly. They value stability because they grew up in a time when stability felt fragile. The challenge is not loving, it's allowing themselves to be emotionally seen in that love. To admit that beneath their calm exterior, they have the same fears of loss, rejection, and longing as anyone else. Learning to voice those feelings can feel like learning a new language later in life. Awkward at first, but deeply connecting when practiced. For many Gen X adults, work is more than a paycheck. It's proof. Proof that they are competent, useful, capable of carrying their weight in a world that never promised to carry them. As kids, being responsible often earned approval. Not causing problems made life easier for stressed adults. So, competence became a pathway to security, emotionally and practically. As adults, this can turn into a powerful work ethic. They are adaptable, independent, and able to function without constant supervision. They don't need praise to stay motivated. They just keep going. But here's the psychological undercurrent. Slowing down can feel unsafe. Rest can trigger guilt. Saying no can feel selfish. Stepping back can stir a subtle fear of losing relevance or worth. Because when your identity is built around being the one who handles things, what happens when you stop handling everything? Burnout in Gen X often doesn't look dramatic. It looks like quiet exhaustion, like going through routines without the same energy, like feeling used up but still pushing forward because that's what they've always done. And asking for help at work can feel just as hard as asking for help emotionally. They'd rather figure it out alone than admit they're struggling. Not because they think they're invincible, but because they learned early that depending on others was unpredictable. If you want to understand Gen X emotions, listen to the jokes they make and the music they love. Their humor often carries a layer of self-awareness, irony, and gentle darkness. They laugh at life's absurdities, at their own exhaustion, at the strange expectations placed on them. Humor becomes a release valve, a way to say, "This is hard," without having to drop the emotional guard completely. Music, especially, played a powerful emotional role in their formative years. Songs about alienation, longing, confusion, and quiet rebellion didn't just entertain them, they gave language to feelings that weren't openly discussed at home. This is why many Gen X adults feel emotions intensely when they hear certain songs from their youth. Those songs weren't just background noise. They were companions during long hours alone, emotional translators when no one else was asking how they felt. Even now, they may process feelings best indirectly through art, through shared cultural references, through humor that hints at something deeper. Direct emotional confrontation can still feel exposing, too raw, too vulnerable. So they circle feelings sideways. They might tease instead of confess, make a joke instead of admitting fear, offer practical help instead of emotional commentary. If you look closely, though, the care is always there, steady, observant, deeply attuned. Because Gen X is so used to functioning independently, they often take on more than they realize. They become the emotional stabilizers in families, the ones who handle crises without panic, the ones who absorb stress so others don't have to, the ones who say, "I'll take care of it," almost automatically. Over time, This can create a hidden emotional load. They are managing their own feelings, plus everyone else's, without always having a place to set the weight down. And because they don't complain loudly, their exhaustion can go unnoticed even by themselves. They normalize stress. They downplay fatigue. They tell themselves, this is just life. But underneath that normalization can be a deep longing to be the one who is cared for instead of the one who is always caring. To be asked sincerely, how are you holding up? And to feel safe answering honestly. This longing isn't dramatic, it's quiet, but it's real. And as Gen X moves further into midlife, many begin to feel it more clearly, not as resentment, but as a gentle realization that strength doesn't have to mean carrying everything alone forever. Gen X built an inner world that is thoughtful, resilient, and deeply observant. They learned to stand on their own feet early. Now, many are slowly learning that they're allowed to lean too. For much of their early adulthood, Gen X was busy doing what they had always done, handling life. Building careers, paying bills, raising children, supporting partners, staying steady through change after change. There wasn't always time to stop and examine how their early years shaped them. Survival mode has a way of keeping you focused on the next task, not the old feelings. But midlife has a different rhythm. There are pauses, quieter evenings, moments when the house is still again, not because no one is home, but because the urgency of earlier years has softened. And in that stillness, something unexpected can surface. Memories that never felt emotional before begin to feel tender. The image of a younger self sitting alone after school, the teenage years spent figuring things out without much guidance. The early adult decisions made from a place of pressure rather than clarity. It's not dramatic. It's not always even conscious at first. It's a subtle emotional shift, a recognition that the independence they've always been proud of came from somewhere very young and very alone. This realization doesn't always bring anger. Often, it brings compassion, a quiet thought. I did the best I could with what I had. Another one follows. I shouldn't have had to be that strong that early. And that's where the softening begins. As Gen X becomes more aware of their emotional history, many start doing something they never had modeled for them, tending to their own inner world with patience. They begin to notice when they're exhausted instead of pushing through automatically. They start naming feelings instead of dismissing them. They allow themselves comforts they once would have called indulgent rest, creative hobbies, quiet time without guilt. This is a form of self-reparenting. They are giving themselves what their younger selves often didn't consistently receive: attention, gentleness, and emotional permission. It might look small from the outside, saying no to an extra responsibility, turning off the phone and sitting in silence, telling a friend, I've actually been having a hard time lately. But internally, these moments are profound. Each one challenges an old belief that their needs are secondary, optional, or excessive. They are learning that self-sufficiency doesn't mean self-neglect. For a generation that grew up taking care of itself, this is unfamiliar terrain. At first, it can feel uncomfortable, even selfish. But slowly, they begin to feel the difference between isolation and solitude, between responsibility and self-erasure. They realize they can still be strong, still be dependable, and also be cared for. One of the most vulnerable steps in this evolution is allowing others to see beyond the capable exterior. For decades, Gen X perfected the image of being fine. They became the calm one, the steady one, the one who could handle it. That identity brought stability, but it also created distance. Now, some are experimenting with something new: emotional transparency. Not dramatic oversharing, not constant confession, but small, honest openings. Admitting they're tired, saying they feel uncertain, letting someone help without immediately insisting, I've got it. These moments can feel strangely exposing, as if they are breaking a long-held rule about not being a burden. But when those moments are met with care instead of rejection, something inside begins to relax. They discover that vulnerability doesn't make them weak, it makes their relationships more real. The child who once sat alone with big feelings is finally experiencing what it's like to have those feelings witnessed without judgment. And that experience can be quietly transformative. For most of their lives, strength meant endurance. Pushing through, staying functional, carrying responsibility without complaint. But as Gen X grows older, many are redefining what strength actually means. Strength is no longer just about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to set something down. It's about saying, "This is too much," before collapse forces the decision. It's about honoring limits instead of ignoring them. They are realizing that the strongest people are not the ones who never need help. They are the ones who can accept help without shame. This shift doesn't erase their resilience, it refines it. They still show up in crises, still stay steady under pressure, but they're learning not to live in a permanent state of quiet strain. They are giving themselves permission to feel, to rest, to choose lives that are not only responsible, but emotionally sustainable. This is not a loud revolution, it's a personal one. A psychological evolution happening in small choices, honest conversations, and moments of self-compassion that would have felt foreign in their youth. Gen X often feels overlooked between louder generations, but their emotional legacy is powerful. They were raised with limited emotional language, and many of them made sure their children had more. They grew up self-reliant and are now modeling that independence can coexist with emotional awareness. They learned to survive quietly and are now showing that healing can also be quiet. They are the bridge between emotional silence and emotional fluency. Their children may never fully understand what it felt like to grow up the way they did, and that is, in many ways, the point. Gen X absorbed the weight so the next generation wouldn't have to carry it alone. And now, as they turn some of that care inward, they are proving something else. It is never too late to become more emotionally honest. Never too late to soften. Never too late to give yourself the support you once had to create alone. Generation X was shaped by absence, uncertainty, and early responsibility, so they became adaptable, observant, quietly resilient. They learned to stand alone before they ever felt fully safe being supported. But now, many are discovering a new truth. They don't have to earn care through competence. They don't have to hide their needs to be strong. They don't have to carry everything alone anymore. The same generation that learned to survive in silence is now slowly allowing itself to be seen, supported, and emotionally understood. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. And maybe that is their final, quiet evolution. A generation that built strength from solitude, finally realizing they are allowed to rest in connection too.